Hello, good morning. Many thanks to everyone for joining us today for our webinar on disability and modern slavery. This is one of a series of webinars organised with and for the members of the Commonwealth 8.7 network. As many of you will already know, the network brings together over 80 civil society organisations across the Commonwealth, all working in their various ways to address issues of modern slavery. My name is Siobhan Scanlon. I'll be moderating today's event on behalf of the Commonwealth Human Rights Initiative, which is an organisation based in London and provides the secretariat to the network. We have 3 speakers lined up for us today to introduce us to the topics under discussion and to provide us hopefully with some food for thought in relation to the challenges ahead and some of the ways forward. Very briefly, there is Sruti Mohapatra. Sruti is the founder and head of Swabiman, a disability organisation based in Odisha in eastern India. She has been a long-standing part of the disability rights movement in India, pushing for policy change and working for the mainstreaming of disability in development policies, for youth employment opportunities and raising awareness. She's also, in fact, the vice chair of the Commonwealth Disabled People's Forum, which supports disabled people's organisations across the Commonwealth in capacity building and advocacy. Sruti will be looking today at the impact of modern slavery on people with disability in the context of bonded labour, natural and climatic disaster, and forced marriages, with examples from across the Commonwealth. Next to speak will be Afazi Komla. Afazi is from Engage Now Africa and is the director of the End Modern Slavery programme. Engage Now Africa is an international non-governmental organisation with offices in Ghana, Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, Uganda and Namibia. He manages the Rescue Initiative, addressing modern-day slavery and human trafficking in high-risk communities through prevention, rehabilitation and prosecution-related work. Afazi will be looking at the situation specifically in Ghana and neighbouring African countries, with a focus on the forced begging of children with disability and outlining some of the challenges that his organisation meets in addressing some of these difficult cases. And last to speak is Dr. Emma Veitch. Emma is from the Helen Bamber Foundation. She's a clinical psychologist. The Helen Bamber Foundation is an organisation based in the UK that provides specialist therapeutic support, medical assessment, legal protection work and practical support to survivors of torture, modern slavery and other human rights abuses. She has previously worked for the NHS as a clinical psychologist and is specialised in the assessment of cognitive function. She will take a closer look at the UK and particularly the work of her organisation in providing assistance to survivors of trafficking with a cognitive disability. Over to you. Thank you very much, Sruti.
Thank you so much, Siobhan, for that beautiful introduction. I thank both CHRI and Richard Reiser of CTPF for giving me this opportunity to talk on this rarely discussed topic, but which is so urgent and which requires everyone's attention. I will start. I would just require 2 things. Number one, I want permission to be a co-host so that I can show my own slides. And second, Siobhan, could you just give me a 5 minutes, pointer to finish? A few days back in the newspaper, we all here in the state of Odisha, we got news which said that a little boy who was mobility impaired, had severe difficulty in walking, was lived with a widowed mother in the village outskirts. One day, a few people walking through the nearby jungle, they heard screams, a little boy screaming. And then when they reached there, 2 people who were gagging this little boy, they were just trying to, pull his eyes out, and they caught him. The boy was rescued, but one eye was very badly injured. So organ harvesting by using people with disabilities has now become a new trend here, which was not there earlier. So we all know that trafficking has suddenly increased in the last couple of years. And people with disabilities, we find they're easy targets. Why easy targets? Because traffickers look for people whom they perceive are easy to target. Nobody is looking for them. They are not much missed. So evacuation during natural calamities and disasters, they have become some of the most easy sites, easy places to traffic a lot of people with disabilities. So, and since we do not have disaggregated data, since we do not collect, we have a lot of documented evidence about trafficking, but we do not have disaggregated data on people with disabilities being trafficked as a result of this. We are not able to find out how many people, especially girl child, women with disabilities, young boys with disabilities, missing during the evacuation process. Now, what is the situation? UNCRPD has come out, so United Nations has come out with a Convention on Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And it has very clearly now stated that because of impairments, the human rights of people with disabilities cannot be compromised. And there are certain sections which very clearly mandate that every state has the responsibility to protect the rights of people with disabilities, to protect them from being slaves, from being enslaved, from being trafficked. All these things are laid down by the UNCRPD. But what is the ground result? When the Sustainable Development Goal, the first report came out by United Nations in 2019, we found that country after country of the country fared very poorly as far as achievement of the goals are concerned with relations to persons with disabilities. So can we just move on? Can we move on? Yes. So, no, yeah. So this is one. Then, no, this one I have already shared with you. What Article 27.2, Article 16, then 14, 13, 29, 30. They all talk about protection of rights of the disabled. But what is happening? The SDG report showed, then the COVID-19, when it came into play, the results, they clearly, glaringly showed that service delivery to this section of people is very poor across the globe, not just in specific countries. Next, please. Yes. So let us now have a look. Let us go through the numbers that we have. Now, Walk Free Foundation is an organization. It is in US. It is regularly coming out with the numbers. Now, the numbers say that in 2023, only 5 days or 6 days, maybe a week, the report has come out. North Korea, Eritrea, and Mauritania, they have the highest prevalence of modern day slavery. 50 million people are living in situations of modern slavery, an increase of 10 million since 2016. Now, we don't have data on disability, but what do we have? The World Health Organization in its 2015 recent report, it states 16% of the world population has a disability. So if we calculate this number, then we will find that so about 8 billion people with disabilities are living in situations of modern slavery. Then the report says 28 million people are in forced labor. Again, if you take 16% of that, it is about 4 million people in forced labor, 4 million people with disabilities, and about 3.5 in forced marriages. So what does modern slavery encompass? It encompasses bonded labor, child labor, forced marriages, human trafficking, and forced beggary, and so on. Another study came up in 2022, and it had taken participants from many countries, and they found that the categories which are involved in different kinds of trafficking is, they found people with intellectual disabilities, mental disability, what they mean is a mental illness, and multiple disabilities, physical disability, sensory, and other disabilities. In case of men, you find them mostly in forced beggary. Next, please. Yes. So here are the numbers. From these numbers, two things become very clear. Couple of things. See, you look at these countries, North Korea, Eritrea, Mauritania, Saudi Arabia. What is happening there? They're all conflict-ridden states. They have state-imposed forced labor, Saudi Arabia, where you have state-imposed forced labor, and they have very weak governance. There you find the prevalence rate of people in modern day slavery very high. And where is it least prevalent? It is in countries like Switzerland, Norway, Germany, and Netherlands, where they have very strong governance. And not just that, they have very strong responses to modern slavery. Next. So since we do not have disaggregated data on disability, we always have to fall back on that 16% from the World Bank and World WHO and calculate. And that's how we are coming at figures which are tentative or which are approximate, but we don't have the exact numbers. Now, what I have done is I have divided the factors for trafficking into two parts. One is the push factors, the other are the pull factors. Now, what are the push factors? See, very poor socioeconomic conditions, poverty, we all know. Poverty is one of the major factors where people end up in modern day slavery. And the natural calamities. As I told you before, here in India, though we do not have data, it has been observed even during the Nepal earthquake, about which we all know a few years back it happened, or the floods in Bangladesh. It is during the evacuation stage that a lot of people with disabilities go missing. The exact reasons we don't know, not documented. The exact numbers we don't know, not documented. But yes, when researchers, when organizers, they have gone house to house, they have heard horror stories how their members with disabilities have got lost or are missing, or they have not been able to find them. What are the other reasons which are pushing them away? Lack of education, lack of skills, income opportunities for women in the rural areas, and they don't have much knowledge. One thing we have found here in the rural areas of India is they are not aware about the active activities of the human traffickers. So that's where awareness programs, they come into play, their need comes into play. And lot of here in India, we know these are some from the newspaper reports, lot of girls who have deafness, they have, after getting a particular skill, companies come and they hire them in big numbers, 50, 60, 70, 100, and they make some arrangements for them in cities like Chennai, in Bangalore, and they lived in very cramped conditions. So a lot of deaf girls have gone missing from this, forced in this cramped camps. Again, there are no numbers, nobody to justify, nobody to be questioned, and people are getting missed. Then, of course, the abuse at home, neglect at home, nobody caring for them, always being considered a burden. These are factors also which push people with disabilities very easily into the traffickers' net. Coming to the pull factors, what pulls them? The lucrative jobs in distant cities. It's always the faraway mountain always looks the most green. So there is more money there. And then what do they see in their own village? They see the traffickers living very affluently. So whatever stories they spin, it's easy to, okay, if we go there, if we go and work, what work? They don't know. What safety network is required? They don't know. Who to inform in terms of crisis? They don't know. Where to go and request for support or for justice? They don't know. The only thing that they know is if I go away, I earn a lot of money, and finally they get lost. And of course, there is a very, what you call, increasing demand, and the Crime Bureau report says that the number of not just girls but boys in the pornographic movies, in the sex movies, and the rapidly expanding sex industry is one of the reasons why a lot of women, young boys with disability, and girl child with disabilities are disappearing. Next, please. Now, some of the common industries, here I have tried to go through as many documented research reports, newspaper copies that I could find. And some of the common industries are brick kilns, carpet weaving, textile and garment manufacturing, embroidery, manual scavenging, agriculture, sex trade, organ harvesting, and child labor. And the documented evidence we have found that, not just in countries like Bangladesh or others, but in Britain also, the garment industry is it has a lot of unpaid and poorly paid persons with disabilities. Then labor rights are being grossly misused. And most of the people who are there, you will find they're mildly intellectually challenged people who are there. In Saudi Arabia, in United Arab Emirates, in Kuwait, we find large number of people who do not have proper documentation. We don't know how they entered that country, but they are being exploited and trafficked, and they are there. Then in Korea and Japan, we have found that the fishing business, it is there is falling productivity. So what they are doing is a lot of mildly intellectually disabled people were found when a group of fisher, what do you call them, assistant or support staff in these fishing trawlers, they were found. What they do is they take them deep into the sea. They are tortured, they are bitten, they are not given money, and then they're killed and thrown into the ocean. And since they are people without any identity, nobody is looking for them, and the trafficker has observed them very carefully to find out if they have support system or not, they just go missing. Then, of course, we know from India and from many other countries, lot of women are being trafficked to the Gulf countries. Polyandry is there, the same woman. And there is states like in India, I know a state, Haryana and Punjab, because of girl child, they don't allow the girl child to survive. And then they are come so short of women that they bring women from other states like Kerala and the others for progeny, and sometimes polyandry also. The deaf girls have been caught where they have to sleep with both the husband and husband's father, sometimes husband's brother, to have a progeny. Next, please. So can we just go back? I think that the slide was repeated, but here I want to show you something. Here is that about 93 million children, this is a UNICEF data, 93 million children under the age 15, they are having moderate and or severe disability. And you can see the numbers for yourself. 10.8, 21 million, these children are engaged in child labor. So just imagine if we just put 16%, if you just take a blanket number 16%, how many children with disabilities are engaged in this thing? We have a Nobel Prize winner, Mr. Kailash Satyarthi in India, who has been extensively working with child labor. And he found that maximum child labor engagement, he found children with mild intellectual disability, moderate intellectual disability, those with orthopedic disability, not with blindness or with deafness, but these categories were employed in large number, and these were mostly men or young boys. And African countries, there is a lot of documented report now, especially I think Mauritania is now 4th in the African region in terms of the people are being sold like objects. And in Sudan also, ever since the second civil rebellion started, about 15,000 to 150,000 people have been abducted, and they have been made slaves, or they are being they are preparing in the deep jungle for this warfare, and basically being sacrificed left and right. And in agriculture, in India, Dalits and with disability, a recent news was in a very prominent newspaper in India, in Tribune, where a man was, after 10 years of disappearing, he had mild intellectual disability. He was found, where he has been captured and kept in the farms, and he was working from 4 in the morning to almost 10 at night, and he was made to work so much that he had forgotten completely whatever little memory he had of his mother, of his sisters, of his village. He had forgotten everything. After rescue and after a lot of psychiatric counseling, he could tell the name of his village. His mother and sister came, and it took them almost a month for the person to recognize his mother. This is my mother, this is my sister. So the situation is very, very grim as far as forced laborers and people with intellectual disability is concerned. Next, please.
Shruti, you asked me to give you a 5-minute warning. So
yes, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Some specific vulnerabilities that increase the risk for the disabled to be trafficked is, what is forced marriages? I have already told you, it can be for progeny. It is for the disability benefits, the disability pension, the 5% reservation in poverty alleviation schemes, or in our state, in Odisha, where we have a 50,000 rupees Indian cash being given to any non-disabled person who marries a person with disability. And that is leading to a lot of women being left behind with a child and the man walking away with the money after 3 years. And then, as I told you the story of Dalbir Singh just now, how he was forced. And another very sad story is of Mrs. Sahu, who found she had 2 children, girl child with deafness. And she found that they were being continuously sexually abused by her own relatives. And so what she did is, she found 2 very elderly men and got her daughters married. She cried, she broke down, and she said that, for me, the choice was between my daughters having sex with one man in a legal way or with many men in the dark hours of the night. It was a very, very sad story. Next, please. And others, I think we have already discussed. So people, because they feel isolated, they're not cared for. So it's very easy for traffickers to contact them. And the lack of support system during natural calamities, this is a growing challenge, and this needs to be addressed on priority. Next, please. So here are some of my, so this is again what I found, this beautiful picture, International Organization for Migration. They have done it. How women with disability are being trafficked, the structural factors, individual, family, community, and we will find all the things that we have been discussing till now. A weak justice system, poor governance, family lack of family support, undocumented migrant workers, all these things, they lead to women with disabilities getting very easily trafficked. Next, please. Yes, so with this, we would like to close saying that how we can reduce this. The first is, we need disaggregated data on disability. It is very important. Whether it is the rescue stage, the relief stage, the rehabilitation stage, employment, education, we are talking about an accident. Few days back, a huge accident happened in Odisha, which made to the national and international news, with 3 trains collided, 3 trains. 2 of them were passenger trains. Many hundreds of people died. What we are doing since 1 week is, we are trying our best to get a list of people with disabilities who were in those trains. We are yet to get it. So disaggregated data on disability needed. Climate change. See, it is going to increase and badly going to increase. What we need is, people with disabilities, they may be consulted. Their perspectives must be taken into consideration while forming policies or implementing policies, because you see, a local person with disability can give the best way, can give the best suggestion how they can be rescued, what is needed to be done in the relief centers or in rehabilitation. Number 3 is ease to justice. Access to justice is very badly skewed for those with disabilities. We need more sign language interpreters. We need every courtroom proceeding to be disabled friendly in alternate formats, and the jails, the prisons, and the support systems, the rescue shelters, everything has to be accessible and barrier free. Finally, we need to create huge awareness on disability. what are the schemes, what are the laws available, how the traffickers can be identified, what are the punitive actions. You see, CRPD is a strong document, and all the member countries, almost 164 countries, have ratified their laws, and India is one of them. And our law, like the Equality Law of UK, like the American with Disabilities Act, the Rights of Persons with Disability Act 2016 is one of the strongest laws, and it has a lot of punitive actions. So awareness about this, both among the government functionaries and the civil society, and especially people with disabilities, is required on a priority basis for people to reduce this menace of modern day trafficking and slavery. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Shruti, for that really comprehensive overview of not only obviously the data in relation to trafficking and modern slavery globally, but equally how it really impacts as well on that population. As you said, 16% of the world population potentially have a disability, and how that data might map onto who are those amongst the disabled people who are equally affected. It was quite striking already your opening remarks in relation to possible cases of organ harvesting. Those are areas of sort of the anti-trafficking information or activity, which is very sort of underreported often. It's very sensationalized, but it's something that was quite striking that you say that there's potentially also cases of that is also targeting people with disabilities in India. And then other types of forms that you mentioned where you have people taking advantage of the disability allowances, and that might also be a motivation for controlling those people, which is also something unusual, but equally how potentially imaginative traffickers can be in terms of developing new forms of control and exploitation. Obviously, the importance of data. Completely, trafficking is an area where the data is still obviously variably based on estimates. You mentioned the global estimates on modern slavery report there at the beginning, and you also mentioned the importance of displacement, and not only displacement in the context of climatic or natural disasters, but also in the context of conflict, which of course there also seems to be an increasing preponderance of, particularly on the African continent, in the Middle East, and now more closely to Europe in the context of Ukraine. And there's definitely been a lot of research in relation to the increase in vulnerability to trafficking around displacement generally, also in the context of conflict, and the impact equally on people with disability, not only not being able to flee as refugees, but potentially being targeted as well by traffickers. So thank you very much for all of that. I see we have a number of participants to the talk, so I hope there'll be some questions towards the end for all of us as well. But to continue with the pace and to make best use of the time, let me now transfer to Afazi, who will take us to the African continent and hopefully give us some insights into some of the problems that you're facing there in terms of this topic. Thank you, Afazi.
It's a great opportunity to be part of this program, and my name is Afazi, and let me use this opportunity to greet all our participants who are viewing and listening to this great program. And I'm going to speak something about the emerging trend on disabilities and modern slavery in Ghana and Africa at large. Modern slavery, child labor, and disability discrimination are serious problems in today's world. Engage Now Africa is a non-profit organization dedicated to fight against this issue. Our mission is to create a better world for everyone where human rights are respected and people can freely live from exploitation and discrimination. I'll use this opportunity for us to view a documentary done by the BBC, and I'll continue. So please, let's take a moment and watch this.
Africa Eye goes under to expose the cruel trade in disabled beggars between Tanzania and Kenya. We show how mothers are tricked into giving up their own children. And reveal the true scale of this sickening trade.
Oh my goodness. 2, 3, 4. So far, we've counted more than 10 that have come out of this building.
We go inside the trafficker's den to expose its darkest secrets. And try to help young victims escape the clutches of their captors.
Oh my God.
My name is Jerry Mwangi. I'm an investigative reporter from Nairobi, Kenya. For over a year, I've been investigating horrific crimes against some of our most vulnerable young people. As I travel through the streets of Nairobi, I often notice large numbers of disabled kids begging. I see just as many in other parts of town, and I'm shocked that they ended up in this situation at such a young age. The same scene is played out in towns and cities across Kenya, and every year their numbers seem to grow. The vast majority say the same thing. They've been brought over from Tanzania to beg. I soon realized that many of them are being watched.
So someone who asks, is that an element of slavery or modern slavery or contemporary forms of slavery in what the emerging trend is? The answer is yes. Upon watching the documentary, we saw most of the people who were trafficked from Tanzania and other parts of the countries across within, and also disabilities are exploited. So Engage Now Africa referred to the exploitation of individuals for labor or services through force, fraud, or coercion. This include forced labor and sex trafficking, begging, and domestic servitude. Engage Now Africa works to corroborate or combat modern slavery by raising awareness, advocate, and support survivors, and partner with government institutions mandated by law to handle such cases. Persons with disabilities are often marginalized and excluded from society due to the physical, mental, and social barriers. As a result, they often exploited by traffickers for purpose of exploitation. They face discrimination, stigma, and limited access to services and opportunities. Engage Now Africa also work to create awareness and advocate against exploitation of persons with disabilities, the right and inclusion by providing education and training and support. Historical background. in the continent that we are, especially in Ghana and other parts of the part of Africa that I have been working with, in culturally, we believe that, or traditionally believe that, they believe that the person with disabilities are a forms of punishment to the family or by the land. Religiously, they also believe that a person with disabilities are forms of curse to their family. And apparently the first speaker have already taken us through some statistics. Let me also add the few ones that I've been able to put here. According to the World Health Organization, people experiencing significant disabilities was estimated at 1.3 billion, representing 16% of the world population. Another organization also did a beautiful work. According to Human Rights Watch Ghana, the population of persons with disabilities was estimated at 5 million in 2012, representing 1/5 of the population of the country or in Ghana. Child labor referred to any work that deprive children the ability or the privilege for their childhood education and their potentials. This is the source of, or this can be referenced to the International Labour Organization. It is also violation against or violation of children's rights, and it can have lasting negative effect on their health and their well-being. Engage Now is committed to end child labor through education, advocacy, and empowerment. What we normally do is that when we find such victims, we empower them to go to school, and we also advocate for them, because sometimes taking such victims to schools, sometimes it's very difficult for the family. So when somebody or a trafficker are able to deal with the family, they will be able to bring them to some of the big cities for exploitation, into brackets, begging. You see most of these victims begging in most of our high street or cities like Accra, Kumasi, and Takrade. And the way forward, what we have been able to put together to see what we can do to advocate for our brothers and sisters, especially the disabled, is to, one, there is an existing law which is not reinforced in Ghana. The Begging and Destitute Act of 1969 criminalized begging by a person with disability, which further intensified the challenges. We believe that if we will be able to collaborate with the state agencies and other partners or non-governmental institutions, we will be able to intensify or re-echo the laws. Engage Now Africa takes a holistic approach to this issue, working with individuals, communities, and government institutions. We provide education, training, and resources to empower people to break free from exploitation and discrimination. Sometimes you will find a victim who needs help, example, wheelchair, to ease their movement, but due to such barriers, they also find it difficult. We also advocate for a policy change and collaborate with the other organizations, including the government institution, to create a lasting solution. Let me take this opportunity to share a success story. During the COVID, we realized that there's a young girl called Mawena who was trafficked from Volta region to Greater Accra. The trafficker went and met the family and portrayed going to her, this young lady. Eventually, this lady was trafficked to Accra and she was subjected to begging. And when we were able to rescue this young girl, we realized that there is no proper intervention for the families, including other persons with disabilities. So the traffickers go to most of these vulnerable communities and recruit them and bring them to the cities. Eventually, the Ministry of Gender and other sectors have been doing very well, but we also believe that there must be a holistic approach to bring voices together, to intensify how we'll be able to help the government and help the people, especially the disabilities, for them not to be exploited. The government have done a lot of work, including children on the street, because most of these victims are pushed or they are helped by children. And as we know, it's against the laws and the constitution of the country and other international treaties for us to engage children in begging. Children supposed to go to school, they are not to earn. So Engage Now Africa have taken upon themselves after the COVID-19 to help such vulnerable people, to advocate and support them, for them to become part of us, because we know that if you are a disability, you can contribute back to the society. We believe that a lot of people who are disabled have been able to stand on their feet and help the communities. Thank you very much for paying this wonderful attention to the program.
Thank you very much, Afazi. That was, yeah, very interesting. Interesting again to see that BBC documentary. You'd already mentioned to me before how you've seen also the increase in these types of cases since COVID, when obviously families were particularly pushed into difficult circumstances in terms of trying to maintain livelihoods with, you know, the inability to travel. So you can imagine the pressure being brought to bear on some of those families as well, who might have given up children, trusting them to people, thinking that they might be able to take best care for them, and in fact ending in these situations where children have been given out to forced begging, like as was depicted. You also picked up, interestingly, on some of those cultural and religious sort of factors that can also influence, obviously, the vulnerability of children, particularly to trafficking. Shruti had highlighted, of course, the other typical factors we tend to talk about in terms of personal and structural and situational factors, but these cultural and religious aspects to also accepting disability within a family are obviously important in that context too. And then the challenges, of course, some of these old laws you see, I think, across you know, not just the African continent. It seems to also be a little bit of a legacy of the British Empire, these sort of criminalization of begging laws. They still exist in the Caribbean as well. They're in Africa. So that's another difficulty in terms of providing, you know, assistance to a victim who is in a situation of forced begging, that they are a victim, that they're not actually a criminal actor themselves. But I mean, clearly that should be clear. But something that obviously your organisation obviously has to work to overcome. And I think then the other important aspect of child labour, generally something that hasn't been touched on, of course, is that you see also children of disabled parents being pushed into situations of child labour because they need to support parents with a disability. So it can sort of go across, you know, different domains, the whole manifestation of child labour as well, not just in relation to the child with a disability potentially, but also where they're pushed into that situation to support a vulnerable family. So thanks ever so much. You've raised some interesting topics for us, and questions I'm sure that will come later. So let me now transfer over to Emma, who will take us to a look at the situation in the UK. And as we said, specifically looking at some of the assistance provision that your organisation is providing to victims with cognitive disability.
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you, Siobhan. Thanks for giving me an opportunity to speak today. And thank you to the two previous speakers for their fantastic presentations. Do I have control of my screen?
Yes, you do.
Okay, so I wanted to talk about the work that our organisation does to support survivors of modern slavery with cognitive disability today. And I particularly wanted to talk about this because after disability related to mental health conditions such as post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety and depression, this is the disability that is probably the second most common disability that our survivors present with. And so just to give you a quick introduction, I know some people will be very familiar with this, but what do we mean by a cognitive disability? So it's difficulty with some or all of the following. So problems in attention, with focus and concentration, problems with memory, problems with language, comprehension, speaking and literacy, executive functions, difficulties with planning, decision-making, our organizational abilities, and problems with visuospatial or perceptual functions that can lead to bumps and falls, difficulties with dressing and using appliances. And people can experience cognitive disability or cognitive impairment for lots of different reasons over the course of their lifespan. So let's start with neurodevelopmental disorders. So these exist from childhood and include, for example, intellectual disability, which is particularly common amongst our survivors, and other disabilities such as autistic spectrum disorder, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Although I will mention that many people in the UK with those diagnoses now emphasize the different strengths and abilities they have, and may reject the notion of their having a disorder. Acquired brain injury, so damage to the brain arising for injury or illness, and in our survivors that's predominantly head injury, closed head injury, sometimes open head injury, for example from a shrapnel injury, and then other illnesses that can affect cognitive function, so brain tumours or strokes. And then progressive neurological illnesses, so these can occur at any age, but they include the various types of dementias and progressive neurological illnesses that can result in cognitive impairments, for example, multiple sclerosis or Parkinson's disease. And then often also just to flag that cognitive disability can be a huge part of those mental health conditions and can sit and go alongside with psychosis, depression, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Just a bit on terminology for the UK. So the National Referral Mechanism is the UK government's framework for identifying victims of modern slavery and ensuring that they receive the appropriate protection and support. And some figures for you. These are taken from the gov.uk site. So in 2022, there were 16,938 potential victims referred into the NRM. And for us, that's a 33% increase compared to 2021, the highest annual numbers since the NRM began in 2009. There are obviously many, many different countries involved in trafficking into the UK, but the most frequent referrals were for people from Albania, the UK nationals, and from Eritrea. And as you know, our other speakers have noted today, there's a huge problem with disaggregated data, being able to specify the proportion of survivors that live with a cognitive disability or indeed any other disability. And at the foundation here, we support survivors who are seeking asylum in the UK. And they may have experienced torture, human trafficking, so sexual exploitation, forced labour, domestic servitude, gender-based violence, so FGM, forced marriage or honour-based violence, domestic violence, persecution based on sexual orientation, or former child soldiers. And what we provide here is a model of integrated care. So we have a specialist trauma-focused therapy department. We also have a specialist counter-trafficking department that deal with protection and safeguarding for our survivors who are obviously remain hugely vulnerable to re-exploitation in the UK. We have legal protection services that will help people find legal representatives and to support their claim, and the provision of medico-legal reports in addition, in support of that claim. We have a medical advisory service composed of GPs. We have housing and welfare to help with accommodation and benefits, and community integration department, which helps with access to college and classes, and voluntary and employment when people are able to work. And we found in our organisation that the idea of cumulative harm provides a really valuable framework to think about vulnerabilities. So we have to think about pre-trafficking harm, the vulnerabilities that led to people being trafficked in the first place, obviously the harm they experienced during exploitation, and then post-exploitation harm, which happens in the UK, sitting within various experiences that happen in the UK that may be extremely difficult or in fact re-traumatizing. So cumulative harm is the multiple physical and psychological injuries that people experience. And situations that cause vulnerability to trafficking in the first place that may add to physical or mental harm experience trafficking. So these are some of the push and pull factors that Sruti referred to, so conditions linked to poverty, conditions linked to previous abuse, conditions linked to previous poor healthcare, but especially disabilities. People with disabilities having a particular vulnerability across almost all areas. And post-exploitation, people with disabilities experience significant healthcare, social and legal barriers in the UK. So some of the barriers to healthcare. It can be a lack of understanding and training amongst frontline staff with regard to what people are entitled to in the UK when they're seeking asylum and when they're survivors of trafficking. Difficulty recognising their complex health needs. And we have a particular issue in obtaining proper assessment and recognition of cognitive disability within our current services. Some cultural differences, so assumptions about language being made, that some of these disabilities are being missed and attributed to difficulties with literacy or speaking English. There is a scarcity of affordable interpreting services and also a disinclination to use them on occasion. Cultural differences in understanding of health and mental health and disability. For example, where in the UK we might see someone as experiencing an intellectual impairment. That's not necessarily the case for the person themselves. That may not have that framework to understand their experiences with. Stigma and shame for survivors, a lack of knowledge and rights for access to systems and services, issues of trust, obviously loss of agency that occurs when people have been trafficked, a lack of having the correct documents, a lack of time and empathetic environment in our busy NHS. And as I said, specific issues in having those disabilities assessed and recognised and supported. There's some social barriers. We have a very complicated benefit system in the UK. And when that support ends, so when people are, hopefully granted leave to remain in the UK, there's a delay in accessing mainstream benefits and a huge risk of homelessness amongst the least well-equipped to deal with life on the streets in the UK. Substandard and inappropriate accommodation is a huge issue. Many people seeking asylum are housed in hostels, and they can be scary places for vulnerable people. People are subject to frequent accommodation changes, which disrupt all the social contacts that they're able to make here, and their healthcare provision, which is incredibly disruptive. They're unable to work. There's isolation and lack of social or community support, and also negative perceptions of people seeking asylum in the media and amongst the local population, and there's racism and discrimination. And some legal barriers too. So people with a cognitive disability may struggle to provide complete or coherent statements of evidence, and have additional issues in giving oral evidence in court. And they may require significant amounts of extra support and engaging with the legal process in the UK, which their legal representatives may not be fully equipped to provide. So what do we do to help break down these barriers? So we have specialist GPs here and clinical psychologists like myself, and we liaise with all the statutory services in the UK to document the nature of the survivor's disability that we've been able to observe. We advocate hard for specialist assessment and entry into those support services, and we provide medical evidence so people can access practical support and suitable accommodation. And we also obviously make adaptations to our standard clinical practice. So more time for appointments, more appointments, information in written or recorded formats using simplified language with the aid of the interpreter. All really important with someone with a cognitive disability. We also provide medical evidence to the court to comment on how a person's disability might impact on their mental capacity to instruct their legal representative, their ability to give evidence and what kind of support they'll need to do so, their suitability to be detained in the UK, because that can happen, the risk that their disability may present to their being returned to their country of origin, and also hugely important, their vulnerability to re-exploitation here in the UK. And just in summary, so together with other organisations in the sector, we're working with the Human Trafficking Foundation and Snowdrop to develop a practical toolkit for professionals working with survivors of modern slavery who also have a cognitive disability. And we're starting to see bits and pieces of research now to try and get at that disaggregated data, to try and see a bit more systematically what the incidence of cognitive disability and other disabilities are amongst our survivors of exploitation here in the UK. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Emma. That was really, really interesting too. Thank you for taking us through those different presentations as to what it is to have a cognitive disability. I think many things that are very new to me. And then the important concept, I think, of cumulative harm. I think you speak about that also generally in terms of looking at vulnerability factors. Sometimes for trafficking, you talk about the accumulation of these factors. It's not just sort of separate factors, and equally in terms of then obviously therapeutic care, there's important aspects in terms of how, again, those different vulnerabilities accumulate and obviously create a completely different impact, a different result. And also for pointing out in terms of post-exploitation, then all the barriers to not only being assessed with a cognitive impairment, particularly you were talking about non-nationals, maybe non-English speakers, and the difficulty in trying to assess those cognitive disabilities when you don't speak the language, and it'll be then equated to possibly the person just doesn't have language skills, which obviously is just sort of adding to the complicated aspect of trying to make these assessments. So the importance of having a grasp of the need, firstly for the interpretation, and equally that language is not just about the inability to speak language, but there might be other things impairing your ability obviously to communicate. But interesting, again, you spoke about the access to justice angle. Shruti had mentioned obviously the need for sort of the physical access to places where people will give evidence or testimony, and there you've given also the aspect in terms of the support that people with cognitive disability will need already to be able to cooperate maybe in a criminal procedure against a trafficker, to be able to communicate effectively, maybe to be able to provide testimony in a courtroom even. And then finally, I think an important point you made is also on the issues of return. Obviously those that aren't, even if, well, those you're talking about asylum seekers, so those that obviously that receive refugee status, there's a certain duration in terms of the time they can then remain in the UK. If they're only a victim of trafficking, as you probably know, they don't have many rights in any case to remain for a long period of time. So ultimately, they're going to be returned to their countries of origin, exactly, unless they can find subsidiary forms of protection. But the issue in terms of their ability to reintegrate when they go back to their home countries, or the type of the risk of harm that they might face if they were to be returned, are all important questions, with looking from the angle of also, again, cognitive impairments and their ability to be able to make a life and find a livelihood if they were to be returned to their origin country. So thank you very much. Yeah, some important questions to keep on board and to find our way through. I wanted now maybe to turn to some of the questions that we've had on the chat. I'd like to read some of them out for those maybe that so everybody will be able to see, or to hear rather. So firstly, there's an interesting question from Richard Reza. He's from the Commonwealth People's Disability Forum. He has asked, what do the panel think of the low wage and poor conditions of sheltered workshops for disabled workers? These are often state funded, directly or indirectly through NGOs. Should we see these as part of modern day slavery? I suppose you're suggesting it's a type of possible state imposed forced labour. I don't know. The UNCPRD Article 27 says we should use the open labour market with reasonable accommodations. Okay, I don't know if the panelists have any particular, I'm not aware of these sheltered workshops for disabled workers. Maybe Shruti, you might be more familiar with these, or what they actually mean. As I said, I'm assuming, is this some sort of, he's interpreting it as some sort of state imposed possible labor, or directly?
Yes, yes, in India, we do have a lot of these shelters, two kinds of shelters. One is when you don't have any place to go, women, especially I'm talking about women. Then they have some shelters where the women can go and stay. Second, suppose the woman has filed a case against someone, she needs protection, she's accessing justice, she is scared of her, of being harassed, or then also they can request for a stay in the shelters, and the ADM, that is the Assistant District Magistrate, he is responsible and he can look into it and assign. Usually they are easy to access and people can go there. But only problem that women with disability face is most of these shelters are not barrier free. They're very inaccessible. They don't have specific arrangement. So while others can manage, it is very difficult for those with mobility impairment to go and stay there. And second kind of shelters is during this natural calamities. You're talking about in the flood centers or the cyclone shelters. They also have this same problem. Number one, they do not have accessibility features. As a result of this, you see, women with disabilities have many. There is menstrual hygiene, for your toileting also. You need a little safe place. You need a little bit of privacy. But somehow in the cyclone shelters, the flood centers, this kind of privacy is not available. So that is one major issues that women face with different kind of shelters in India.
Okay.
Anything else that you wanted to know?
Yeah, I think he's talking about workshops, though. He's talking about places which are for disabled workers.
Yeah. Now
which are often state funded. So not just sheltering in terms of accommodation, but places actually to go and work. But obviously with low wages, poor working conditions, I assume.
What they do is, this group, I was telling you, they hire people, they give training here in Odisha. For example, in the context of India, there are a lot of training centers now, skill development centers, but in bulk, in large numbers, they give training. Now, these companies, mostly the garment manufacturers, they come from states like Gujarat, they come from Tamil Nadu, they come from Bangalore, the slightly affluent parts. And what they do is they select people in bulk, in large numbers. But when they take them and they keep them, they promise that apart from salary, you're going to get accommodation, this, that. But those accommodations are really terrible places. Like 100 people in a small room, So work-related accommodation is generally very poor, is in a poor sanitation, poor lighting conditions. It's really, really difficult for people with disabilities to manage there. Another kind of thing which is coming up now, I have been hearing in India, is a lot of their, the paid places that we have, working girls hostel, where at a very subsidized rate, you can say, or depending upon how much you earn. So those kind of working women with disabilities hostels are now coming about in India, where the rate is very much subsidized. And women and girl child, they can go, I mean, the 18 plus year, they can go and stay and work. Very nominal rates they're doing it.
Okay, thank you. There's also a question here, really for you, Emma, in relation to how do you share some of what you know in terms of people with cognitive disability and accessing justice? How do you sort of share that information more broadly with prosecutors and maybe in judiciary, so that there is a little bit more of an understanding of the needs for support in all of this area?
So as an organisation, we do offer some training, both to the decision makers in the Home Office and to various other organisations, but also I suppose it's within the particular medico-legal reports that we write.
Okay.
That advice would be tailored to that specific individual. So can I just, is the question up on in the chat?
It's up on the chat, yeah. It's more, thank you, Emma. And how do you go about sharing this more broadly with law enforcement and prosecutors?
Yeah, so I mean, if people want particular information, they're very welcome to email me, and we'll see what we can put together to give out. But mainly within the UK sector, it's the training that we offer, and also our legal protection team working with the person's legal representative.
Okay. Another question here in relation to what we've said regarding disaggregated data, that there's so little of it. What is going to be done to change this? Who's going to start, what organisation, what global reporting organisation, for example, might be best placed to take this on? I don't know whether we have any particular feedback to that. I mean, I know myself from like national level reports on trafficking, sometimes it's still difficult to get them disaggregated for age. You don't know whether you're talking about children, whether you're talking about adults, to go another level, and sometimes they're not disaggregated for forms of trafficking, so sometimes that might be a little bit of an indication, but yeah, this is a big uphill battle. I don't know, do you have any ideas, Shruti or Afazi, as to how is this data going to be collected better in terms of the types of forms of trafficking and then the type of person?
You see, Siobhan, in terms of data, numbers, so we are all looking towards 2030, isn't it? The 2030, the year where the SDGs, the achievements, everything will be calculated, measured in terms of numbers and qualitative reach. So this is very important. Consciously we have to make a push to our respective national governments that whatever data that they are sending, you see, in the government, now the state governments or the even lower level of administrative blocks, they will send data to the state capital, that will go to the national capital, that will be again collated as per SDGs in the UN. So with this data collation is happening, we have to ensure that our respective national governments send disaggregated data. Suppose in goal number 4, inclusive education, they are sending the data of how many students passed the school, high school. They must send the data how many girl child with disability, how many boys with disabilities passed the high school. If this kind of data is collected at every level of the administrative block in a country, in my country, the district level, then the state capital, and then the national government, and finally reaches the UN. When we come out with the SDG final number we will get. Number 2, every country has a census. So in this census, we have to ensure that disability disaggregated data is collected. We already have a Washington questionnaire, isn't it? Washington group of questions, where we want to know functionally how people are challenged, whether you can walk or not, whether you can eat or not, do you have difficulty in hearing, in seeing. So that is a wonderful source. And then, of course, everything that we are doing, we are tracking this modern slavery. We are tracking migration. We are tracking slavery. Everything we are tracking. So all that we have to do is we have to add one sub-component of disability. And we will have plenty of data at our hand. I'm very hopeful. I'm waiting for 2030. And I want to see how much disaggregated data is available on disability on every aspect: education, employment, climate, migration, and so on and so forth.
Siobhan,
Yeah,
please unmute
sorry,
yourself.
yeah, I'm on now. Afazi, this is a question maybe for you in relation to the push factors that we were describing, or some of you have described, in terms of socioeconomic push factors, which might also influence, obviously, families that were depicted also in the documentary that might give their children up to traffickers. And how can you provide a sort of a better safety net? How can you provide more inclusive support for the entire family, so that they're not under maybe such pressure to be giving up children in those type of circumstances when maybe they themselves can't cope with the additional responsibilities or livelihood burden. Maybe in relation to how you work, you were talking about how there's a need, obviously, to integrate or to ensure that the support is inclusive of the entire family, when also even a child maybe gets returned into those circumstances. I don't know,
Okay.
is there anything that is particularly key in terms of trying to ensure that there is that sort of safety net around maybe families that are maybe particularly at risk?
Okay. Yes, it's true. We have a couple of intervention programs that we have put across board, which when we identify someone with disability, first and foremost, we do a background check and see if the family will be capable and competent to take care of that child. If not, even the state have kinds of they leave small monthly subsistence that they give it to some of these disabled. But notwithstanding, as a non-profit organization, what we normally do is that we help them with a program or initiative called Sustainable Livelihood Support Assistant. So when we identify a person and he is going through such challenges, we sit down with the family in collaboration with the Department of Social Welfare and see if the person is school-going age, we'll make sure that person go to school. Example, we provide them with educational materials, and sometimes those who deserve or those who need wheelchair, automatically we also provide a wheelchair, because education in this country is free. Notwithstanding, they also need few books and other stuff, which we do. I'm trying to, based on the incentive, the Sustainable Livelihood Support Assistant. On that note, we collaborate with the other stakeholders in that communities to make sure that the family do the right thing and take care of that child, so that the child will not be rape trafficked or become vulnerable to the situation they find themselves. I can promise you that most of them are hacking or listening to the programs that we are doing. I also notified that, or I also observed that most of the laws are written in English, and most people cannot read the English. So it's a big challenge for the country, like a language barrier. We must be able to translate the laws and then the policies into the local language that the people can understand, because language barrier is a key problem. I go to Uganda, I go to Ethiopia, I go to Kenya, and even other parts of the world is a big issue. I've also realized that if we can include all stakeholders who are working into this industry, so that people will be able to advocate and create awareness or educate people on the emerging trend. Other than that, my anticipation is that by next year we'll have a lot of disabled people in the street of Accra and other parts. When I go to Kenya, when I go to Uganda, and even Ethiopia, the same issue is pending. Most of the laws are written in English, and the people doesn't understand. And policymakers must understand that when you identify problem identification stage, you need to bring people together. And then from that, the formulation, which include queen mothers, chief, the law, the people in the communities, so that they can also reinforce or articulate the words or whatever we want to do. And then the adaptation stage also is very, very important. We need these people, because without them, we cannot disseminate the information to the society that we are trying to create awareness. And the last one is the implementation stage. We know the government have so many things to do, but if they will be able to collaborate with the key stakeholders who are working to end modern slavery or contemporary forms of slavery, and then they will be liable to such data, information, and all those things. Because without data, you can't say anything. We are not making a headway because most people doesn't have the data at hand. And this is what I can share, that it will be very great if stakeholders, government, regional blocks, trying to make sure that they understand the issue at stake. Because no businessman will come to the continent, and if you realize that there is a couple of modern slavery and child labor, you will not be able to survive. Because as soon as you are crippled by the law that you are using vulnerable children, underage children, to produce services and goods, the law will not leave such institution. The same thing is that let us do the right thing. Let's help government and other regional blocks to do the right thing, so that we'll be able to fight against child labor, modern slavery, or contemporary forms of slavery. This is what I can share.
Okay, thank you, Afazi, on that. Just maybe one final question here is looking at how you managed to integrate some of the change that has already gone on in many countries in relation to disability-related laws, implementing the Convention on Persons with Disabilities. But how do you ensure that, for instance, I suppose in the development of anti-trafficking action plans or anti-modern slavery action plans, whatever you all have, that there is a disability-related angle incorporated? I don't know whether any of you have particular experience of having maybe participated in policy developments on trafficking or on modern slavery, and to ensure that the particular issues that are relevant to people with disabilities are also reflected in these plans or in these policies. Is there any commentary on that? Because there's a sense in some of the chat that there's, you have these laws, they're integrated, but then the issue isn't necessarily reflected further afield. I mean, the typical sort of argument about people working in silos, I suppose. Also questions in relation to access to employment, that you have these laws, but still there isn't sufficient access to employment for persons with disabilities. That's obviously on a slightly different point, but it's sort of the same thing, that they need to essentially move over into different fields too, or understanding needs to be integrated in this relevant field that we're talking about, modern slavery and trafficking. So yeah, is there anybody want to input there?
Yes.
In fact.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead, Shruti, maybe, and then we come to Afazi.
Okay. Yes, I think in India, I can tell you this thing is, the disability sector, the NGO sector has become quite assertive. So immediately when a policy, whether it is by the Department of Health, whether it is by the Department of Youth, whether it is Science and Technology, whenever a policy is coming on the public domain, we are immediately working on that policy, ensuring, critically analyzing, finding if disability is included or not, sitting with the government. You see the new law that Government of India has, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016. This law was not drafted by any government department. The sector selected people from the sector. They sat with some of the government officers, some of the lawyers, and this law has been drafted. It was advocated by persons with disability, lobbied by persons with disability, and in 2016, it is history, everyone knows, when the parliament was in a log jam, the opposition was not allowing the government to pass any law. It was active advocacy by all of us that saw the only one law being passed by the parliament, that is Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act. It's a historical achievement so in India now we are actively involved. What I personally feel we are lacking is all the government departments, they are working in silos. If somehow we are able to set up an interdepartmental coordination unit, which is headed by the department which parks disability, and there is a nodal officer in every department, in every ministry, who is looking specifically at disability, accessibility, inclusion, then things can be better managed, more smoothly managed. Because I personally feel India has some of the strongest and best laws in every aspect. What we need now is a good, integrated, inclusive implementation mechanism. And when I say this, it's not just for India. I think for whole of South Asia, this is now the situation. Voices of people with disability, parents, young people with disabilities are very aspirational now. Everybody wants to be part of the governance process, part of the development process. And this is quite a positive change that is happening across the world, not just India.
Okay, thank you, Sruti. And
Yeah.
Afazi, did you want to also say maybe how has Ghana taken these topics on board in the context of its policy?
Okay, so basically we have been part of the national plan of action, and we have not been able to integrate the disability component into the modern slavery or the national plan of action. I believe I'll be able to work with the National Anti-Human Trafficking Secretariat to let them know that these are transport of knowledge. It will help. I also want to emphasize that, as you know, we are not a big country or more advanced like UK and other parts of the world. 23 years ago, when they passed the Paloma Protocol treaty, it's 23 years now, and even though it's 23 years, even most of the people in the country doesn't understand what is called human trafficking, what is called this and that, what constitutes trafficking. So I believe education and sensitization and publicity will also increasing awareness will also help. And as time goes on, I know the government have raised a lot of issues about begging and all those stuff, so they will be able to integrate all those things into the National Plan of Action. We have Person with Disability Act 2006 at 715, which talk about all those things, but it doesn't talk about the inclusion of modern slavery or how to infuse modern slavery into such act. So I believe those are some of the gaps that we will be raising it into a meeting and see how best policymakers will be able to adopt some of these suggestions.
Thank you. And Emma, I see your hand is up, please.
Yes, just for, I suppose from a UK kind of context, just to say that there's a growing recognition in the UK that for UK nationals, people with mild learning disabilities are particularly vulnerable. There's a host of kind of statutory legislation that that supports people more broadly in their lives. But the issue is that at the intersection of kind of trafficking, modern slavery, intellectual disability, and seeking asylum, there's just a big gap in provision, recognition and provision. And we are really hampered in the UK, I think, by that lack of disaggregated data, because money and support follow the numbers, right? So we need the data in order to kind of build the services and access that specific and targeted support.
Okay, well, we have come to the end of our session. I'm sorry for some of the questions that remained outstanding there, but I hope that the speakers have managed at least to address some of the additional points that have been raised in the chat and on the question and answers. I'd like to thank very much all of you, you three presenters, an excellent job in terms of giving us basically a whistle-stop tour of some of the different issues from different parts of the world, and equally some interesting insights into still what we need to be doing. Obviously, the question of data, I think it's relevant in many different ways, but obviously here, it's a particular glaring gap. So anyway, hopefully some of what we have discussed has raised awareness amongst others that have obviously been on this chat, on this webinar, and you can take some of that information away with you and hopefully make good use of it. Just to remind that there'll be a poll circulated. I hope some of you can just take a few moments at the end now to maybe complete that. But I wish you all the very best in your work, all three panelists, and thanks ever so much for giving up your time this morning to present your expert views on some of these topics for us. Thank you very much, and hopefully we will meet again. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You have been a great moderator. Thank you, Siobhan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Siobhan. Yes, thank you.
Four panelists. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Emma
Bye-bye.
and Afsari. Bye.
Bye, nice to meet you all.